Machiavelli wrote about power for centuries. But there's one law he never dared to write down, and it's the most dangerous one. He wrote about deception, about fear, about when to strike and when to wait. But there was one law he kept silent, not because he didn't understand it, but because saying it out loud would have made him too dangerous even for his own time. The law of cold mercy. The understanding that forgiveness isn't moral, it's tactical. That compassion isn't weakness unless you wield it like one. And that the most ruthless thing you can do to someone isn't destroying them. It's forgiving them on your terms, not theirs. This is the law the powerful have always known but never spoken. Because the moment people understand mercy as a weapon, the entire game changes. You've been taught the opposite. Forgive because it's right. Show compassion because it's noble. Be merciful because that's what good people do. And you believed it. You wore your forgiveness like armor, thinking it made you strong. But every time you forgave without strategy, every time you showed mercy without calculation, you weren't being virtuous. You were being predictable. And predictable people don't command respect. They invite exploitation. The world doesn't reward the endlessly forgiving. It devours them, slowly, quietly, until there's nothing left but the hollow belief that being good should have been enough. Machiavelli knew this. He understood that power and morality aren't enemies, they're weapons in the same hand. The weak forgive because guilt eats at them, because they need the emotional release, because they can't sleep knowing they held a grudge. But that need makes mercy automatic, and automatic mercy is just another word for weakness. The ruthless law he never wrote is this: forgiveness must be cold, calculated, stripped of emotion, and rebuilt as strategy. When you forgive, it should serve your position, not your conscience. When you show compassion, it should create leverage, not closure. This isn't cruelty. Cruelty is emotional. This is control. And control is the only currency that matters. So if you've ever felt used after forgiving someone, if you've been the bigger person so many times you forgot what your own boundaries looked like, if you've ever wondered why kindness only made you a target, then you're ready. Ready to learn what Machiavelli whispered between the lines but never dared to say directly. The law that separates those who are ruled by their mercy from those who rule with it. There are 5 truths buried in this silence. And by the end, forgiveness won't mean what it used to. Power won't look the same. And you'll never give mercy the same way again. Let's start with the illusion. The one they sold you before you could even question it. You've been sold a lie since the moment you could understand language. They told you mercy makes you good, that forgiveness is the mark of a strong soul. But here's the truth they never mention. Mercy isn't virtue, it's a leash, and you've been wearing it your whole life. Every time you forgave too quickly, every time you let disrespect slide because being the bigger person felt right, you weren't elevating yourself. You were training others that your boundaries mean nothing. Mercy without strategy is just weakness dressed in moral clothing. And weakness always gets exploited. The system taught you this for a reason, not because it makes you noble, but because it makes you controllable. When you're programmed to forgive endlessly, to absorb disrespect with a smile, to never retaliate, you become predictable, and predictable people are easy to dominate. Look around. The ones who scream loudest about compassion are often the ones most trapped by it. They sacrifice their power on the altar of approval, hoping someone will finally see how good they are. But no one respects the person who forgives everything. They just learn how much they can take from you without consequence. I watched this play out in a corporate merger years ago. A CEO known for his fairness kept extending second chances to a VP who repeatedly undermined him in board meetings. Everyone saw it. The VP would smile, apologize, promise change, then strike again. The CEO's mercy wasn't kindness. It was fear. Fear of seeming ruthless. Fear of losing his reputation as the reasonable one. By the time he finally acted, his authority was already gone. The board removed him 3 months later. His mercy didn't save him. It devoured him. This is the psychology of the trap. You've been conditioned to believe that power and morality are enemies, that to be strong, you must abandon goodness. So you cling to mercy as proof you're still human, still worthy. But real power doesn't reject morality, it redefines it. Mercy becomes a tool, not a doctrine. Forgiveness becomes a calculated move, not an automatic response. When you understand this, you stop being the victim of your own virtue. You start weaponizing it. And that shift from emotional reaction to strategic choice is where control begins. The people who rule understand something you were never taught. Mercy is not about the other person. It's about you. It's about what you gain or lose by granting it. Does forgiving this person strengthen your position or weaken it? Does it create loyalty or invite more betrayal? These are the only questions that matter. Everything else is performance. Everything else is the trap, and once you see the trap, you can never unsee it. But seeing it doesn't free you yet. First, you need to understand what forgiveness actually does to the human mind, and why that makes it far more dangerous than punishment ever could be. Forgiveness doesn't set anyone free. That's the fantasy they sell you in books and movies. In reality, forgiveness creates a bond stronger than chains. When you forgive someone, you don't release them, you own them. Because now they owe you. Not money, not favors. Something far more valuable. Emotional debt. And emotional debt is the currency of control. The person you forgive will carry that weight whether they admit it or not. Guilt doesn't evaporate just because you said the words, "I forgive you." It lingers, it festers, and it makes them yours. This is why the truly powerful never forgive from kindness. They forgive from calculation. They understand that a guilty conscience is more obedient than a punished one. When you punish someone, you give them clarity. They know where they stand. They can hate you cleanly, plot revenge, or simply move on. But when you forgive them, you leave them confused, uncertain, forever asking themselves, why did they let me off? What do they want from me? That uncertainty is a leash you never have to pull. It pulls itself. Every interaction afterward becomes colored by their unspoken debt. They second-guess their words. They seek your approval without you asking. They become smaller in your presence. I saw this dynamic in a partnership that should have ended in legal warfare. One partner embezzled funds, not a catastrophic amount, but enough to justify criminal charges. The other partner had every right to destroy him. Instead, he forgave, publicly, generously. He even helped restructure the business to give the guilty partner a second chance. Everyone praised his mercy. But here's what no one saw. For the next 7 years, that forgiven partner worked like a man possessed. He gave up equity without negotiation. He deferred to every decision. He never challenged, never questioned, never threatened to leave. Why? Because the weight of that forgiveness was heavier than any contract. He was bound by guilt, not law, and guilt is unbreakable. This is the psychology of dominance through mercy. When you punish, you engage the survival instinct. the part of the brain that fights back. But when you forgive, you engage the conscience, the part that surrenders. Punishment activates resistance. Forgiveness activates submission. The person you forgive will rationalize it 1,000 ways, but deep down, they know you held their fate in your hands and chose to let them live. That knowledge rewires their perception of you. You are no longer an equal, you are the one who decided their survival. And survival is the deepest form of control. But here's where most people fail. They forgive and then expect gratitude. They want the other person to acknowledge the mercy, to thank them, to change. That's weakness talking. Real power doesn't need recognition. It doesn't need the forgiven person to even understand what happened. The debt exists, whether they see it or not. The control is already established. Your only job is to never let them forget. Not through words, but through presence. Through the subtle reminder that you could have destroyed them and didn't. That reminder doesn't need to be spoken. It just needs to exist. And once it does, you'll notice something strange. The person you forgave will start policing themselves. They'll anticipate your displeasure before you express it. They'll limit their own behavior to avoid disappointing you again. That's not rehabilitation. That's domestication. And it only works because forgiveness, when done right, doesn't heal the wound. It keeps it open just enough to never fully scar. But if mercy creates debt, then the question becomes, when should you actually use it? Because mercy given to everyone is mercy wasted. And wasted mercy is just another word for mercy loses all power the moment it becomes predictable. If people know you'll always forgive, they'll always transgress. It's not cruelty, it's psychology. The human brain is wired to test boundaries. Push, measure the response, adjust accordingly. When your response is always the same soft hand, always the understanding nod, always the second chance, you're not being virtuous. You're training them to disrespect you. Predictability is the death of dominance. The second someone can forecast your reaction, they stop fearing it. And without fear, there is no respect, only familiarity. And familiarity breeds contempt faster than any insult ever could. This is why selective mercy is a weapon. When forgiveness is rare, it becomes valuable. When it's unpredictable, it becomes terrifying. People don't know if you'll absolve them or destroy them, so they tread carefully. They measure their words. They hesitate before crossing you. That hesitation, that split-second calculation in their mind, is respect disguised as caution. I've seen executives use this to devastating effect. One CEO I studied had a reputation. Cross him once, you might survive. Cross him twice, you're erased. Not fired, erased. References gone. Reputation torched. Industry doors closed. People knew this, so when he did show mercy, it felt like divine intervention. The person forgiven didn't just feel grateful, they felt spared. And spared people rarely bite the hand that let them live. The mistake most people make is thinking consistency equals strength. They believe that if they're always forgiving, they'll be seen as stable and fair. But fairness without variance is just weakness in a moral costume. Real power requires inconsistency, not chaos, calculated unpredictability. Sometimes you forgive the small slight and obliterate the large one. Sometimes you ignore the insult but destroy the person who disrespects your time. The pattern isn't random, but it's illegible to outsiders. They can't map it, they can't game it, so they default to the safest option, avoiding your boundary entirely. That's the goal. Not to forgive or punish, but to create an atmosphere where people regulate themselves out of uncertainty. There's a reason interrogators use intermittent reinforcement. Reward and punishment delivered at random intervals break resistance faster than any sustained method. The subject can't predict what's coming, so their mind spirals. They cooperate not because they understand the rules, but because they can't risk guessing wrong. Apply this to mercy. When someone wrongs you, don't rush to respond. Let them sit in the silence. Let them wonder. Are you planning revenge? Have you already forgiven them? Do you even care? That ambiguity is psychological warfare, and when you finally act, whether you forgive or retaliate, it lands with disproportionate force because they've been marinating in their own anxiety. You didn't just respond, you controlled the entire emotional arc of their consequence. But here's the edge that separates amateurs from operators. Selective mercy isn't about mood, it's about outcome. You don't forgive because you feel generous. You forgive because forgiving this specific person in this specific moment gives you leverage. Maybe they have information. Maybe they're useful later. Maybe their public humiliation would make you look petty. The calculation is always tactical, never emotional. And the same applies to punishment. You don't destroy someone because they hurt you. You destroy them because letting them survive creates more problems than eliminating them. This is the ruthlessness the world doesn't teach. Mercy and cruelty are not opposites. They're tools in the same hand. And the hand that wields them with precision doesn't need to justify itself. It just acts. And after the action, people will construct their own narratives. He's fair but firm. She's forgiving but you don't cross her twice. Let them. The story doesn't matter. The fear does. And fear only exists when they can't predict you. But unpredictability alone isn't enough. Because even the most random-seeming mercy can serve a darker purpose, one most people never recognize until it's compassion is the most elegant form of domination ever invented. It disarms without a weapon. It infiltrates without force. When you show empathy at the precise moment someone expects cruelty, you don't just surprise them. You colonize their psychology. They lower their defenses. They let you in. And once you're in, they never see the manipulation coming. This is why the most dangerous operators in history weren't the ones who screamed and threatened. They were the ones who listened, who nodded, who made you feel understood. Because understanding is the gateway to control. And control dressed as compassion is invisible until it's already complete. The weak think power is loud. That dominance requires aggression. But real power whispers. It soothes. It validates your pain while quietly reshaping your perception of reality. I watched a negotiator do this during a hostage situation, not one I was involved in, but one I studied extensively. The captor was erratic, furious, armed. Every instinct said to match his energy to assert authority, but the negotiator did the opposite. He mirrored the man's frustration, acknowledged his grievances, made him feel heard. Not because he cared, but because anger is a wall and empathy is the door. Within 3 hours, the captor wasn't just cooperating, he was apologizing. He'd been psychologically disarmed by someone who never once raised his voice. That's not kindness. That's warfare in soft clothing. This is the psychology of emotional infiltration. When you show compassion, you trigger oxytocin, the bonding hormone. The brain interprets your softness as safety, and safety breeds trust. Trust breeds vulnerability, and vulnerability is the moment you strike, not with violence but with influence. You reshape their narrative. You become the one who gets them when no one else does. And once someone believes you're the only person who truly understands them, They'll do almost anything to keep that connection alive. Politicians use this. Cult leaders perfect it. Abusers weaponize it. The mechanism is identical. Isolate through understanding, bond through validation, control through emotional dependency. But here's the part that makes this truly ruthless. Compassion doesn't even require sincerity to work. You don't have to feel empathy to perform it. You just have to understand its effect. The person receiving it won't question your motives because vulnerability makes people stupid. They want so desperately to be seen, to be validated, that they'll accept your empathy at face value. And once they do, they're yours. Not through chains or threats, through their own emotional investment. They'll defend you to others. They'll rationalize your contradictions. They'll ignore red flags because acknowledging them would mean admitting they were fooled. And no one wants to admit that. So they stay. They comply. They submit. All because you gave them the one thing they craved, the illusion that someone cares. The most disturbing part? This works even when the target knows what you're doing. I've seen relationships where both people understood the game, where compassion was clearly tactical, where every soft word was calculated, and yet the receiver still responded, still softened, still lowered their guard, because the brain craves empathy the way the body craves oxygen. It's not optional, it's survival wiring. And survival wiring doesn't care about your intellectual awareness, it overrides logic. Which means even your understanding of this mechanism doesn't make you immune. It just makes you aware that you're vulnerable. And awareness without application is just knowledge rotting in your skull. But if compassion is this powerful, then the question stops being whether to use it. The question becomes, how do you wield mercy when emotion is stripped away entirely? When forgiveness is no longer human, but mechanical? Cold, surgical. That's where the final law. Cold mercy is mercy, without the weakness of emotion. It's forgiveness calculated not for peace, but for position. Most people can't separate the two. They think mercy requires warmth, that forgiveness must come from the heart. That's why they fail. Because the heart is a liability in strategy. The heart wants closure. It wants healing. It wants the other person to change, to learn, to become better. Cold mercy wants none of that. It only asks one question: does this serve my power? If yes, you forgive. If no, you don't. There's no anger in the refusal, no satisfaction in the granting, just calculation, just survival, just control. This is what separates rulers from the ruled. The average person forgives because guilt eats at them. They can't sleep knowing they held a grudge. They need the moral release. But that need makes them weak. It makes their mercy a reflex, not a choice. Cold mercy has no such attachment. You forgive not because it feels right, but because it positions you correctly. Maybe forgiving this person keeps them in your orbit where you can monitor them. Maybe it prevents them from becoming a martyr. Maybe it confuses your enemies who expected retaliation. The reasoning varies, but the mechanism stays the same. Emotion is exiled from the decision. What remains is pure strategy. And strategy doesn't care about fairness. It cares about outcome. I learned this watching a business partner handle betrayal. His co-founder stole a client list and started a competing firm. Everyone expected war, lawsuits, public destruction. Instead, he called the betrayer, congratulated him on the new venture, and offered to refer clients he couldn't serve. People thought he'd gone soft. But 6 months later, the competing firm collapsed. Not from sabotage, but from the co-founder's own incompetence. And when it did, my partner didn't gloat. He simply hired him back at a fraction of his previous equity. The betrayer accepted because he had no options left. Cold mercy didn't heal the relationship, it engineered total dominance. The forgiveness wasn't moral, it was a long-range tactical move disguised as grace. And it worked because there was no emotion to cloud the execution. This is the psychology of detachment. When you remove feeling from forgiveness, you remove vulnerability. You can't be guilted into mercy. You can't be shamed out of ruthlessness. Your decisions become purely functional. Does this person serve a purpose alive or destroyed? If they're more useful broken than dead, you forgive them and keep them close. If they're a recurring infection, you excise them without hesitation. There's no anger in the cut, no joy in the control. Just the cold recognition that power requires maintenance, and maintenance sometimes looks like mercy. Other times it looks like annihilation. The appearance doesn't matter, only the result. The final law is this: never forgive from your heart. Forgive from your position. Never show mercy because you feel generous. Show it because it serves your architecture of control. And never, ever confuse this with cruelty. Cruelty is emotional. It's revenge dressed as justice. Cold mercy is neither. It's the understanding that in the game of power, every move must be calculated, every gesture must have purpose, and every act of forgiveness must leave you stronger than before you granted it. The world will call you cold. Let them. Cold keeps you sharp. Cold keeps you alive. And cold mercy, true cold mercy, is the only kind that lets you rule without ever appearing to. Because the greatest power is the kind people mistake for kindness, right until the moment they realize they've been owned all along. But that realization comes too late, always too late, and by then you're already. Cold mercy isn't kindness. It's dominance you learn to disguise. Forgiveness isn't moral. It's leverage you stopped recognizing as power. The ruthless law Machiavelli never said out loud was never about cruelty. It was about clarity. The clarity to see that every act of mercy is a strategic decision, not an emotional reflex. That compassion without calculation is just bleeding for people who'll never stop cutting you. And that the moment you strip emotion from forgiveness, you stop being controlled by it. You start controlling with it. That's the line. The one most people never cross because they're too afraid of what it makes them. But you're not most people anymore. You've seen the mechanism now. The debt created by forgiveness. The weapon hidden in compassion. The cold precision required to forgive without weakness. These aren't theories, they're tools. And tools only work when you use them. So the question isn't whether this is true. The question is whether you'll keep pretending mercy is automatic. Whether you'll keep forgiving from your heart instead of your position. Whether you'll stay predictable, exploitable, and soft. Or whether you'll finally understand that power doesn't apologize for existing. It just exists. And mercy in the hands of someone who understands this law doesn't heal. It dominates. But this law doesn't stand alone. Before you wield cold mercy, you need to understand the foundation, the reason most people misread power entirely. The reason they think Machiavelli was about cruelty when he was really teaching survival. If you haven't watched They Fear the Man Who Read Machiavelli Correctly, stop everything and watch it now. Because that video shows you what happens when you strip away the moral panic and see the prince for what it actually is. A manual for those who refuse to be controlled. Without that foundation, cold mercy is just another tactic you'll misuse. With it, you become untouchable. Watch it. Then come back and decide who you're going to be. Write this in the comments. Mercy is leverage. Power doesn't announce itself. It just moves.